Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Bat of Doom track at Virtual KernelCon 2020. We're here with Ryan from Microsoft, and she's going to share. I think it's going to be a somewhat personal story, actually, but it's a story about barriers and how part of her journey has taken her to where she's gotten today. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you used to be a self-proclaimed introvert, maybe still are, but we're going to hear sort of how her journey has taken her from where she was to where she is today. I think it'll be interesting. As usual, please put the questions into Discord chat for the Bat of Doom channel, and we'll proxy them out to Ryan towards the end. Thanks, Ryan.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Ryen Macababbad, and hopefully the subtitles are working for you. They definitely do not know how to say my last name. But so this is Breaking Barriers, and I am a self-proclaimed introvert, and mostly because although I love people, I get absolutely exhausted time I can spend with people. Of course, right now, problem. And for some reason, my microphone keeps changing, so I apologize, but the captions will continue to keep going. So if you miss something, it will be on the captions. All right, so let's get started. On Discord, I'm RyRy8040. And on Twitter, I'm Ryan_Mac. Make it easy. If you want to find out more about me a little bit more in depth, you can go to this link. And that's it for that part. So for what we're going to talk about today, I'm really going to talk about kind of my journey, how I've gotten to where I've gotten, and then dive into how I got from IAM, Identity and Access Management, into security and how those two kind of fit together, and where I decided to kind of make that my identity. Also talk about the challenges that introverts have, and what we have to overcome, and really the saying that I take very deeply to heart, which is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I want to talk about what I did to get where I wanted to be, because I feel like as introverts, oftentimes will stand on the sidelines and will watch other people achieve their dreams. And we want to find out why, or why we can't, or what we have to do, or how we can make it there ourselves. And oftentimes that's hard to do because we're introverts, and so asking people to tell us about themselves is a challenge that has to be overcome. So I'm here kind of just telling my story, so that you don't have to ask that uncomfortable question. And then I want to talk about how you can create opportunities for yourself so that you can actually achieve your dreams as well. All right. So to start off my story, it pretty much started how most people start. You know, I was born, I had a childhood, very traditional sense. I had a family and I had siblings. I still have siblings, and I have a family again. But what ended up happening is that my life as I knew it changed. So I was about 7 years old, and I lost my home. I was homeless, and I lost my family, and I was on my own. And except I didn't have a balloon because my life was not fun. And so what ended up happening is I went into what's called foster care. So the foster care system, where another family took care of me and they got paid to do that. And so essentially, I became a paycheck. Now, over the course of a decade, I moved around from one home to another, until eventually I found my, I want to say my forever home, although I was there for only 3 years. But it was the longest period of time up until then that I had been in a home after I entered the foster care program or foster care system. So after I graduated from high school and I was an adult, I realized that I had to actually take care of myself. I had to figure out how to live as an independent person away from the kind of stability, if you want to call it that I eventually was able to get towards my later teenage years. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to enter the workforce, but what am I going to do? And so I first started out with massage, and I was like, okay, I like to give people massages. I used to give my mom massage, my foster mom massage all the time. So I'll go and be a massage therapist. So I did that. And then while I was in clinicals, I found out that I don't do well with strong scents, including people's body odors. So I decided that was not for me. But I wanted to keep figuring out how I could actually make a living and support myself. And so I went to college, community college, and they had a nursing program. And so I did all of the prerequisites so that I could get into the nursing program. However, it was highly competitive, and even people with 4.0s weren't getting in. I had a 3.8, and I didn't get in. So, plan C. I decided to take a stab at being a phlebotomist. Obviously, you can tell from my bad jokes that I wasn't really good for that either, um, because I don't do well with blood. So that was another thing that I learned about myself. So then I decided I'm going to try and be a linguist because I like languages. I learn languages pretty well. And so I would learn Chinese. And I was really excited by this idea of becoming a linguist and learning Chinese. And so I started researching and I started looking at language schools. I found out it was like $60,000 to go to a language school, and that was not money that I had. I was already several $1,000s in debt from student loans, and I just could not see myself getting more in debt on something that I wasn't sure was a sure thing. And so then, as I'm doing my research, I find this school. It's called the Defense Language Institute, and you can attend it if you're part of the military and if you score high enough to be a linguist in the military. And so I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to sign up to be a linguist and sign up in the Marines. And so I go over to the Marines and I say, hey, I want to be a linguist. And they're like, well, you don't actually get to choose your job. And so I was like, well, okay, that doesn't work for me. So I went next door to the Army recruiter and I said, hey, I want to be a linguist. And they said, great, we'd love to have you, because the Army wants to bring everyone in. And so I did all the testing and I got into school, and I told my recruiter, hey, I really want to learn Chinese. And so I got shipped off to basic training, and I found out there that I was going to be a linguist, but not for Chinese. I was going to learn Arabic because this was in 2006. So, marhaban, that means like welcome. So, welcome to my talk. So, I learned Arabic. But it turns out that linguists really require a lot of auditory learning. You have to sit there with headphones and listen to people speak and um, figure out what they're saying and then transcribe what they're saying. You also have to like act as a translator, and sometimes that means sitting on calls with headphones on. And I'm not an auditory learner, and so I learned that about myself as well. And so this job was not going to work for me either. But luckily, at that time, the analyst job that people who fail at being linguists fall into, that one was full. So I couldn't go and be an analyst, and instead, I got to be tech, a network and systems engineer in the Army. And I found out that I was actually pretty good at this tech stuff. I learned how to troubleshoot, and it kind of came naturally to me. And so I scored really high on all of the practical exams, and then not so high on the math because I don't really like math. But so that's how I ended up getting into tech. Now, fast forward to about a decade later, and my time in the Army was coming to an end. And so suddenly I had to find another path and figure out what I was going to do outside of the military. And this was another transition point for me, and I really struggled with figuring out where my military identity fit into this civilian world that I no longer really felt a part of. And at that time, I was very fortunate to be able to join a program that Microsoft has started in 2013 called the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy. And during that program, I learned how to be a software engineer, and that's what I joined Microsoft as. I started in the identity product group, so Azure Active Directory, and then while this was a good path for me as an introvert because I would just sit and code all day, you realize when you look at all of the things that I tried to do before I got into tech, it was all about helping people. And so the thing that I realized about myself is that I was really passionate about helping people. And I really wanted to help people grow, to help people solve problems, whether those were technical problems or human problems. And so I became a program manager within the same org, within identity, and I started working with customers. I was working with them to help deploy the Azure Active Directory features within their environment. A lot of them were moving to the cloud for the first time, and they really needed to understand not only what the implications were, but also how they could secure their data. And that was really the first time that I started thinking about how identity actually fits into security. And so I started working with customers to um, set up conditional access and to set up multi-factor authentication. But what we saw at that time, this is back in 2017, was that there were a lot of companies that were still heavily reliant on legacy authentication. I think Michael Bourne was talking about this in his presentation, and so you would get all of these conditional access rules, but there was a way to actually kind of bypass them when the organization was using applications that were legacy applications. And so what happened is that all of these customers, even though they were moving to the cloud and they were securing their data, they were doing all of the right things, because they had this heavy reliance on these on basic authentication, they actually ended up getting phished a whole lot. And MFA didn't come into play because these apps didn't understand MFA. And so what I found is that I was very passionate about helping our customers to secure themselves and to protect themselves against these kinds of threats. And so I started learning more about security, and I started following people on Twitter and started talking to more folks about how people could become information security professionals and how they got into the business. And what I found is that a lot of times there were people that would go the traditional route, and they would have they would have college degrees, and they work their way up from a security analyst up to a security manager. And then most of the people that I was talking to had like 20 years experience in the industry. Well, I said to myself that one, the industry has changed vastly since 20 years ago, right? And so the same problems that people faced 20 years ago aren't the same problems that they're facing now. And at the time, like, the cloud was still relatively new, and people were still trying to figure out what hybrid identity was. And so I wanted to be part of the solution, and I wanted to help people to actually become more productive and more flexible with what capabilities we have in the cloud, but at the same time do it in a way that kept them secure. Because all of a sudden, and I think Michael actually said this too, all of a sudden you had all of these applications that were being used outside of your network perimeter, right? And so instead of being able to secure things behind a firewall, now you had to figure out different ways to secure them. And it really came down to your identity being the control plane, your identity being the perimeter. And so um, in in finding this kind of passion of mine, I started looking for security roles within Microsoft. And so I talked to a bunch of different hiring managers, and I finally decided on one in Intune. Well, once I got there, they actually had just started a new offering for a Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. And so that's what I ended up doing instead because of my passion for security. Um, After that, what I realized after a couple of years in that role was that I was doing all of this technical work, and while I was helping customers, I wasn't getting the in-depth helping people need that I had fulfilled um, as part of my role. So I was constantly spending time just going out and mentoring people, and trying to help other people outside of my job. And so I was working with people all day in my job, and then I was working with people all day outside of my job. And so I was getting kind of exhausted because all of this peopling made it impossible for me to really have time to recharge. But I wasn't getting my needs met in one place. And so I ended up trying to figure out what it was that I wanted and what it was that I needed. But that ended up being a challenge, right? It was a huge challenge for me to really think about what it was that I wanted. And so as I'm going through this, and as I'm exploring what my options were, I started talking to more people, and I decided that I wanted to become a manager, and that's what I am now. I started as a people manager about a month ago. So now I have my own team of cloud solution architects, and I focus on identity and security, and helping our customers um, to build a better productivity suite while improving their security posture, and without having to give on the productivity in order to increase the security. And that's what we found in the cloud, right? And so what I did was I started um, trying things out and trying things out in my previous role to figure out what it was that I wanted. And I just started going through this list. What is it that I want? I need to uh, I need to help people and I need that to be part of my role, but I don't need it to be transactional. Because if it's transactional, then all it is exhausting. It doesn't add any value back into me. And as much as I love the technical aspect of my role or my previous role, it didn't give me what I need and the fulfillment for helping people and building relationships. And so that is one of the things that I found out about myself is actually that I needed to have a role that was both technical and that helped people grow. And so my choices really came down to being a manager, a people manager, or in a technical role, or helping to train people. And so I started looking for these types of roles and I started talking to people about how, what kinds of roles they thought would work for that. And so that's one of the things that I ended up having to do was talking to a lot of people in order to figure out what it was that I wanted. And and then trying to figure out where opportunities might exist for me to be able to get in there. So what I saw was that I couldn't get stuck, right? Because there were these things that, as an introvert, I would see these people and they were doing awesome things, and I wanted to ask them about it. But I would think about all the ways that they might think about me. Like if I approach them, are they going to think that I'm stupid? Are they, are they going to be annoyed by me? Um, what if I open my mouth and just like garbage comes out? All of these things are worries for me. Uh, but what I found is that if I just um, go and do it and I just go and talk to them before I even have the opportunity to talk myself out of it, then it ends up going all right. Most of the time, not all of the time, but for the 10% of the time that it doesn't go right, then it doesn't really matter anyway, because the 90% of the time that it has gone right has allowed me to get to where I am today. And as you saw, I tried a lot of different things in order to get to where I am now. I failed at a lot of things, and that's okay. Failure is completely okay. But if you don't try something, then you've already failed. So if you try something and it doesn't work, then you can try something else. And a lot of that is also about finding people who will tell you exactly how you're doing and tell you without a filter, right? And some of that, you have to be able to accept that people are not always going to give you praise, but hopefully you can find somebody who will give you constructive feedback that is actionable, and that's something that you can actually use to help get ahead. And that's something that I have used to get ahead in my role. What I do is I always find mentors, and sometimes those mentors are only on Twitter. Sometimes they are on Discord, although I stopped using Discord as much. But thanks, Tim, for getting me back on a Discord. Um, but sometimes those mentors are on LinkedIn, and these are all places where I can interact with other humans without actually having to be in front of them. And I found that that has been something that has helped me get over this of uh, bubble of fear that prevents me from talking to other people. Um, and we're going to get into that a little bit too. So, in order to actually get here, though, first I had to um, get over that discomfort and realize that it was going to be there. It was going to be a part of my life. and it's always going to be a part of my life. And I just need to get comfortable with it being there. I need to accept that it's going to be there, and just continue moving forward in spite of it, rather than letting it control what my actions are, like doing this talk. All right, so getting my foot in the door. That often is the challenge that a lot of us face, because it's not really always about what you know. You might be like the best at whatever it is that you're doing now. But if nobody knows about it, or if you're not going out and telling other people about it, then you're not going to be able to leverage their relationships. And it's really about leveraging uh, relationships in order to get to where you want, right? So what I found is that as much as I feared talking about myself and talking to other people, sometimes it's not even really fear. It's like sometimes I know exactly what I want to say, but for some reason, when I open my mouth, it comes out all garbled. Um, and it just makes me absolutely mortified to speak again. But I started laughing at myself, so that um, that it, I don't know, so that it would be a little bit better and a little bit easier each time to talk to people that I might not even know. And I don't succeed all the time. Sometimes I will go to an event and I'll try to talk to a couple of people and it just doesn't work out, and then I'll leave. That happens more often than I want to admit, but that's okay too, because the relationships that you do build the other part of the time that you do succeed, um, they are part of the reason why I'm here and I'm able to speak at Colonel Con, is because people talk to me when I talk to them, and I felt comfortable enough to submit a talk, even though my internal monologue told me that there's no way it was going to get accepted, and yet here I am. So it's not always about what you know, it's about who you know, talking to people and asking them for help, but also telling people what it is that you want and what you're looking for when you're looking for something, whether it's mentorship, whether it's a role, whether you're trying to figure out exactly what it is that you want to do. If you talk to other people, they can help to provide more ideas. Even this talk came from a conversation that I had with someone else, because I wanted to help people and share my story so that maybe one person gets inspired and is a little bit braver for it and are able to, achieve one of their goals on their checkbox. The other thing that I found is that the requirements are not the requirements. And I say this because a lot of us will be looking for jobs, and like when I looked for my last two roles, so this role and my last role, when I read the job requirements, I did not meet them. And a lot of times, uh, what happens when we encounter job requirements that we don't meet, will say, oh, well, I'm not qualified for that, so I'm not going to even try. Or sometimes we'll send in an application and know that we're not going to get it, so we don't put any effort in behind it, right? We know that we're not going to get it, and so we don't even try. And then other times we just talk ourselves out of trying at all. But for the last two roles, like I said, I didn't meet the requirements. The last one that I did, that one of the role requirements was to have 5 years experience on Windows 10. But at the time that the job was posted, Windows 10 hadn't even been around that long. And so it's like, well, obviously I can't meet that requirement, and no one can meet that requirement because no one exists. It didn't exist 5 years ago. Or it was someone's brainchild and it was just scribblings on paper or a computer, OneNote, because Microsoft. The other thing is, like, for this role, they wanted me to have over 10 years of hybrid identity experience, but hybrid identity experience really came out about 7 years ago. And so obviously that wasn't a thing that I could have either. But if I let the requirements actually gate me on whether or not I applied for the position, then I wouldn't be where I am today. So oftentimes it's not really about what's in the job description or what's in the requirements, but what's in the job description. Because if you know that you can do that job, then go for it. But don't just apply for it, because automated systems are crap, right? They filter, they screen out for the most part, because they can't screen in. It's hard to screen in, because you have to have a human involved in screening in, right? And so what ends up happening is that a bunch of people get filtered through that just say yes, they have all the requirements, even if some of the requirements are not even ones that anyone could meet. And so I tell people to find out who's hiring, who the actual person is. And a lot of times, like, for example, at Microsoft, right? Anybody who is an employee at Microsoft can actually find out who the hiring manager is for a specific role. And maybe they don't know that person, but they know you. And if you ask them to, they could send a note to that hiring manager, and maybe they feel comfortable with that, and maybe they don't. But you won't know if they do unless you ask them. And then the other thing is that neither of the roles that I got because I applied to the position. I got both of these roles because I talked to the people and I told them what I wanted. And I told them what my passion was and why I wanted it. And they got me in front of the hiring manager, or they got me connected to someone else who was part of the person looking for the person looking to fill that role, right? All right. The next challenge, once you apply for a role, is like actually interviewing with a human being, which is not our best area often, right? And the key here is, people always say, like, be yourself, just be yourself, but you get in there and you get nervous, and you think that they have some view of you that you're supposed to fit into, and so you get into this like uncomfortable suit, or you're wearing your hair pinned up if you have long hair, or you take all your piercings out, or you cover up your tattoos, and you're no longer you, because these are all extensions and expressions of you. And maybe for some places you do have to do that in order to even be considered. And that's unfortunate. And maybe that's not a place where you want to work. But if that is a stepping stone, then maybe that's something that you have to do, if it's a stepping stone. But what I would encourage is to find a place where you can be yourself, you can be your authentic self, and you can bring your passion and excitement to talking about the role, and do that during the interview. Let them see your passion. Don't worry about them being put off by too much passion, right? Because if you're passionate about doing something, you are going to work better at it than someone who is just there to get the paycheck, right? And people know this. Hiring managers know this. And so I would much rather have a person who is passionate about a thing come and apply for a job and have to have a little bit of extra training than getting someone who is bored and burnt out and doesn't really want to do the thing that they're doing anymore, but is just doing it to have a job. I don't want someone to just have a job. I want someone to enjoy what they're doing in their work, because I know that they are going to bring their best selves to work, and they're going to have more creative ideas than someone who is just doing it to get the paycheck, right? um, Mirroring. So one of the things that I learned early on, as a child in foster care, is how to adapt to other people. Um, because if you walk like them and you talk like them, then you're more likely to fit in. You're less likely to get beat up. And I know that's kind of a sad story, but it's like real life, right? If you mirror other people's actions, if you lean in, if you pay attention to your body language, you're going to be more likely to make that person feel comfortable and make them feel, the interviewer feel like they're interested in what you're saying, than if you sit back and you cross your arms, or you seem disinterested, right? Kind of mirroring what their body language is saying, but don't overdo it. Every time they fix their glasses, don't reach up and fix your glasses, right? But maybe if you know they wear glasses, you could wear glasses to your interview as well, because we are basically herd animals, right? If we see something that looks like us, we feel like a solidarity there, right? And then the other thing is that you're going to be uncomfortable in an interview. If you're not uncomfortable, then you're not being challenged by it. If you're not uncomfortable, then you don't really care. You don't really want it. So get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that tells you something important. It tells you that you want this. Uh, all right. Now, when it comes to getting what you want, you have to ask for it, because no one's a mind reader. And as much as we wish that people would pay more attention and they would get the subtle cues that we don't like doing that, or we want to do something else, or we don't feel like we're being celebrated or appreciated, sometimes people are just oblivious, and they don't know. And so you have to ask for what you want, but you also have to understand what it is you want in order to ask for what you want. And this is all about creating opportunities for yourself. When I talked about getting into my previous role, it was because I went to I went to my friend that was on that team, and I said, hey, you know what? I'm interested in this team. I'm looking for a new role, and this might be a good fit for me. What do you think? And then and then he got me to the hiring manager for an open role on his team. And so I talked to the hiring manager, and as I went through the process, in the interview, they made an offer to me. But I knew that I had certain desires around building my security portfolio. And so, as part of the offer acceptance, I said, hey, I want to make sure that if I'm going to take this role, that I will be supported in furthering my security knowledge, because it will be good for Microsoft. It will be good for our customers. I'll be able to have other conversations with them that I wouldn't be able to have if I just limit myself to this scope. So I provided what I wanted, and I provided the justification for it. And I wrote this down in an email, because for me, telling somebody that in person is a lot harder. And I haven't built that skill yet, but I can write it down and I can click send before I talk myself out of it. And so that's what I did. And then the other thing that I did was I said, I'm coming here. If I accept this offer, then I'm coming here mid-year. And I did all of this hard work the year before, and I'm still moving, um, within the company, and I would be up for promotion if I didn't move mid-year. So if I take this role, I want to be assured that I will be considered for promotion, this next review cycle, even though I will have only been on the team for 6 months at that time. And in asking for this as part of my acceptance offer, I was actually able to leverage kind of an upper hand because they wanted to offer for me. They wanted me to join their team. And these things that I was asking actually were not unreasonable, right? And I gave justification about why I wanted these things. And in doing that, I ensured that when the time came that I could switch to a security focused role within that same team, that I was supported in doing that because I had this acceptance in writing that they would support me in my journey to building my security portfolio. Then the other thing that I did was I made sure that all of the hard work that I had done up to that point for Microsoft was not discounted, and that's really important. And so for this, I would say, one, write it down. And if you can't say it in person, you can send it in email. But even if you do send it in or say it in person, still write it down in email and say, hey, you know what? We talked about this, and you said this. You agreed to this. Did I capture that correctly? And that gives you it in writing again, and you can fall back on that if you don't actually get what you want, or the outcome that you thought you were getting based off of that conversation. The other thing is that, like, I have this voice. Maybe you don't have this voice. I guess some people don't have this internal monologue like I do, which I think is weird because it's been there my whole life. But I have this internal monologue that often tells me, like, you can't do something, or don't ask for that. They're going to think that, that you're asking for too much, or they're going to think you're high maintenance, or they're going to think that you're not, working with the team, or they're going to think that you're more trouble than you're worth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what I say is, let others contradict your negative internal monologue, but also ask for others to make that contradiction. Because if you always have this internal voice in your head telling you, no, you can't, don't do that, without anyone contradicting it, then there's so much more that you could be doing, that you could so much more potential that you have, that you could be achieving, if you didn't have that voice in there constantly bringing you down. So let other people contradict it and believe them when they do, right? So, one, make sure it's someone you trust, make sure it's someone you respect and admire, and someone who's not just going to tell you fluff. If you need to do something in order to get ahead, then you don't want someone to kind of gloss over and sugarcoat that. And then when you ask for what you want, remember, it's going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. It's 100% okay for it to be uncomfortable when you're asking for what you want. Because as a society, we're kind of taught, like, you have to be considerate of everyone, and you have to put others first, and you have to share, and all of these different things. And we forget to tell people that they also have to take care of themselves, because this is the thing, and this is a kind of a big lesson that I learned, is that if you're not helping yourself, you are actually limiting the amount that you can help others. Because, for example, as I have achieved new heights, and now being a people manager, I have, one, the ability to help all of my directs with their professional growth, but I also have the ability to help others in learning about how hiring managers think. And I can share that knowledge. But if I hadn't taken this jump, if I hadn't helped myself get here, then I wouldn't have that experience, and I wouldn't be getting even more experience, and I wouldn't have that ability to share, and I wouldn't have that ability to help others. So that's really important. All right, so we're coming up on, we have about 15 minutes left. So I want to summarize and then open up for questions. So here's the summary about what we talked about, right? I don't have a degree, and actually I didn't say this, but I also don't have any certs. I failed a whole bunch of times before getting into tech, but I still got here, and I'm working at one of the biggest tech companies in the world. um, Once I got into tech, I actually got interested in security because of identity and because of my own passion of wanting to help people. And I let my customers being compromised fuel my passion for information security and my learning, so that I could help prevent it in the future. And then we also talked about the challenges that we introverts have in talking to people, and how much of everything that we have to do in order to get ahead really involves talking to people. That's probably the biggest challenge that we have in getting to where we want to go, is because you know we we struggle with that at times. And it's not all the time, and we know that, but it's enough of the time that it can really hinder our career progression. And then I hope that I was able to give you some ideas and strategies on how you can overcome some of these challenges in order to create opportunities for yourself, and also in the future create opportunities for others, because that's what this is really all about. Is if you can get yourself to a place where, like for example where I am, then you can also provide guidance and mentorship and coaching to other people. And honestly, you don't have to be a manager in order to do that. I started mentoring people my first year at Microsoft when I was a software engineer, because I got to a place that a lot of people wanted to be. And we can say that about a lot of things in our lives, that we might know, a lot about crypto, or we might know a lot about reverse engineering, or we might know a lot about OSINT, and all of these things we might know about them, and we can share that. And uh, and in sharing that, we can help further other people and create opportunities for them. And then finally, we talked about, and I hope that I really drove this home for you, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because when you're uncomfortable, it means you're growing. And that's important. That's the best thing about all of this, is that constant growing and growth. So thank you so much for joining me on this journey. And now we're open for questions, Tim.
Thanks for sharing with us, Ryan. I think that there's a lot of people in the channel that are drawing similarities with their own or parts of their own paths, and there's a lot of I don't know, community feel going on in the chat. There are a lot of questions too. I just wanted to let you know that there's a lot of people that are sharing small snippets of their own experiences, and I think that's kind of part of the hope for your talk.
Yes, absolutely. I love that, because when we start talking about, sorry, your talking is not coming through on the closed caption, but anyhow, when we start talking and having these conversations, like, it allows the opportunity, it's creating another opportunity for other people to realize, hey, we're not alone.
Right, right. And actually, I'm starting to wonder if um, it's really hard to measure, but I'm kind of curious whether the virtual conference environment actually enables different people to have discussion. Maybe not more, maybe not less, but like a different set of people probably feel comfortable typing at various hours than walking around a conference venue. So it might be interesting to think about how to merge those or try and do something differently in the future.
Yeah.
So you have a question that I had actually thought to myself midway through your presentation. I suspect that one person voiced it, but many people had the question. You talked a bit about your internal monologue, and what do you do when your internal monologue is basically saying, don't bother anyone, you're not important enough?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question is, what do you do when your internal monologue is saying, don't bother anyone, you're not good enough? And part of that, I actually struggled in 2012, 2013. That was my Afghanistan deployment and the reason why I got out of the military. And it was a really rough deployment, and I had a lot of loss, and I didn't speak up because of my internal monologue, not saying that I wasn't good enough, but saying that I had to be strong, and that if I was actually uh, talking to other people, that they would think that I was weak. And so what I found is that I actually got really I got really depressed, and my internal monologue continued to hit me every single day, and up until the point that I was actually suicidal. And right before I pulled the trigger, I decided to call someone. And I didn't tell him that I was suicidal. I didn't tell him that I was getting ready to pull the trigger. I just told them that, like, things are rough for me right now. And I'm feeling like I'm failing. I'm feeling powerless and helpless. And he started contradicting every single negative thing that my internal monologue was telling me, without me even telling him. And that saved my life. It saved my life. So, what I would say is lean on your support network, but also invest in it, build it, because you need that support network to contradict your internal monologue when you're feeling rough. Like, I feel like we kind of have this like devil and this angel. I have a positive, it's to me, it's the same voice in my head, right? But it's either saying positive things like, hey, go work out, or it's saying negative things like, don't even bother, like, you're not worth it, you're so out of shape, you're never going to recover. Um, and I often feel like my the positive voice is weaker than the negative voice, right? And so I need my support network to contradict those things, and I tell them straight up. I say, you know what, like, I have this voice in my head, and like, we don't have conversations, like, it's not answering me or anything like that, it's just this internal monologue anyway. So I'm not crazy. But it's like, it's telling me these things that I'm not good enough. What do you think? And then, like, my partner will tell me, like, you're gonna you're gonna do awesome at this presentation. And my friends will tell me, like, you're gonna rock it, like, what you're doing is so good, like, it's so beneficial for the community. And this pumps me up and it helps me. And just like when I called my friend that day, um it was enough for me to get through one more day, and then one more day, and then one more day. And now I'm at a place where, like, I don't have to worry about that, but sometimes I still struggle with that voice saying, like, hey, they're going to find you out. They're going to figure out that you're not good enough to be here. They're going to fire you, or no one's going to show up to your talk. They're not going to be interested in what you have to say. Like, why are you even bothering? Who do you think you are? But all these other people will tell me, like, you inspire people, you help build people up. Saying what you said helped me to apply for that position, and it helped me to talk to that person, and now I got my dream job. And and so I think I would say, like, bring your support network in, and let them know what's going on, and let them contradict what your internal monologue is saying.
Mhm. I think that you basically answered this question, but I want to be sure, because on the risk that I misunderstood something or that there's some nuance, I want to ask it also. Um, uh, I don't know if it's Gab or GAB, but somebody's asking, when and how did you develop the skill and the courage to challenge your inner monologue? And if it's the same story, that's fine. I just, if it's different, I didn't want to miss it.
No, it that is the same story,
Great.
but it was after I came back, and I suffered for about 6 months, kind of in this torment. Everything that had been my identity was ripped away because, like, the person I knew before I left was not someone who would ever even consider suicide. It was not someone who would give up. It was not someone who would, do some of the things that I did. And so I had to rebuild my identity, and it took a lot of therapy. I went through 2 years of therapy. It took a stint in inpatient in the mental health ward, and it took a lot of self care and love, and it really was. It's it's actually it's a continuous thing. It's me um, being okay with my mistakes and knowing that I'm going to have them, and me building up a very strong support network so that when I stumble, I'm not doing it by myself.
So, part of your talk kind of sketches around people's comfort zone or things that they think are familiar. I mean, even building your support network is about building some familiarity and places and people and topics and things that you feel comfortable with. um, when you want to get outside of your comfort zone and try something new or sort of extend yourself and put yourself out there, do you find it's better or different, or how do you compare doing that with people you know versus people you only kind of know, or acquaintances, or even strangers?
Um, I think it's harder with people that I know because I'm very invested in what they think about me, right? So I guess not really the people that I know, but the people that I care about, right? Because there's a difference, right?
Yeah.
There are people that I know, like people at work, um, that are acquaintances, but maybe I'm not really invested in what they think about me. But then there's like people like my boss and my skip level boss, my manager's manager, whom like they affect my life, and so what they think about me is really important too. And so like with my manager, I met him because of his manager, who I became friends with, and I very much value her perception of me. But I sat down and I talked to her about my story, and um because I valued um that she would see me for who I am and not for who I thought she might want to see. I valued that more because then it gives me permission to not be perfect. And so, yeah, so I told her my story. I told her like about, my mental health and where I've been and what I want to do and my dreams and everything. And that's how I got to where I am today. I think I answered the question.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. The we're butting right up against time, but I think that I want to ask one more, because I think a lot of people are sort of curious. You've had quite the journey to get to where you are today. A lot of people don't have that colorful of a story. Like they don't have. Nobody has exactly the same experiences, but I think yours are probably perhaps more impactful, or larger than life maybe. But it does beg the question, what's next? So you've gotten to where you are now, but like, what are your plans? What's your next goal? Where are you headed?
Well, I think, like I said, I've only been in this role for about a month. And so I really want to become the best manager that I can be. But um, But I think that my dream of what's next is being able to affect multiple management chains, uh, and how they uh, bring the human aspect to meet the business aspect. Because I think a lot of times we focus too much on the business aspect and we don't realize that we really need to invest in the human aspect in order for our businesses to really reach their potential. So that's, I think, where I want to go eventually.
Sounds great. It sounds like something you'd probably be pretty good at.
And then take over the world, of course.
Yeah, you got to leave that part off until it's in a position to happen. You can't.
Right, right, right.
We'll have to cut the recording just a little bit early. No, thank you for your time and for sharing your story, Ryan. I think you connected with a lot of folks at ColonelCon, and it was great having you last year. It'll be good to see you in the future.
Great, thank you.
So we're still in the Bat of Doom track, and we're going to just switch gears to the next speaker, and we'll be back just momentarily.